Welcome to Femographics. My name is Shelby Evans. I am older than the franchise team in the state of hockey. I was in attendance more than once throughout the Twins' longest postseason lose streak. I spent my 13th birthday watching the longest ever Grand Slam final between Novak Djokovic and Rafael Nadal. And around that same time, my family stayed at the same hotel as the U.S. women's national soccer team, and I cried when my dad said he was in the elevator with Abby Wambach. I then sat in the lobby and stared at the back of Sydney Leroux's head for 20 minutes without saying anything. And I'm a sports journalist. I'm actually very close to completing my master's in sports journalism, and this podcast is my version of my 95 theses. I have spent a lot of my life wondering if I consume sports in the wrong way. It was a very family-centered activity for me, and when it came to finding other people to relate to about the way that I liked sports or just reading information that I found interesting, I felt very alone. And now that I have taken this role on and I have worked as a journalist and I am seeing how this space operates, I am seeing that this divide of fan spaces is larger than ever. And social media has definitely funneled that in the way that that's algorithm identifies different demographics of a person and can feed videos based off of that history of cookies they collect. And because of that, there's been this sort of divide among sports fans of what it means to like athletics and what it means to enjoy the experience. And I'm going to start off by showing this clip from my fellow Minnesotan. And I will preface this by saying it's out of context, but it has spurred a lot of discussion around these ideas that I'm going to be looking into. And I think it's important to let it start this discussion.
I think another part of it is probably how the fandom was sort of measured, because in the last 10 years, especially, this pop culture like moment with sports has really grown and evolved, and there's so much media about sports. And now we have heated rivalry and off campus, and we had challengers. And I think prior to that, so much of interest in sport was measured through like knowledge of the players and statistics and very sort of like male centric marketing. And now it's shifted into, it's about the fashion, it's about the travel, it's about the lifestyle, it's about the personal lives of the players. And I think social media has also really, really contributed to that, because before sport was, like a viewing experience, and now it's so participatory. And I think women are really the culture drivers in that, because they're the ones who I would say are more interested in the wags and the personal lives of the players and, the fashion aspect of it. And they're the ones who are making the memes and making the heated rivalry edits and that sort of thing. So they really are the culture drivers. And I think now leagues and rights holders are paying attention to how much they really contribute to the sport.
Okay, and the way that some people responded to it.
There's been a ton of discourse on social media surrounding female sports fandom, and as someone who runs a page called Baseball for Baddies, I want to talk about my content style and our community and why it's a little bit different than other pages that market towards women. Let me start by saying there's no correct way to be a sports fan. You can consume sports content however you want. If you want pop culture references, WAG references, if you want to go to the game for the experience, the outfits, the lifestyle, that's totally fine. I have a lot of very good girlfriends and guy friends that go for that exact reason. When I created Baseball for Baddies, the main mission was to create a community of female ball knowers, because what I found when posting my content, which initially was just explaining sports to women, was that we had such a strong community of females that were just as passionate about the actual game itself than the men were.
I have a tweet that I can feature as well. The important thing is it's an hour-long podcast, which she said was seconds out of that. And the 9 minutes before she said that was really interesting and really insightful. And there is this fact that men have been the leaders of the canonization of sports fandom. And we can't ignore that. That's the history. It's been an industry dominated by men playing the game, men owning the teams, men writing about the teams for the other men that they talk to about the teams. And it's not new that women like sports. It's not new that they cheer for it and want to engage and continue to cheer for the teams. But how did we get here? And where are we going as an industry, are all things that these creators have made me stop and consider and decide to take the time to talk about. Something to understand at the beginning of this podcast is that journalism is a business. There are these media companies that employ journalists, and the companies need to make money to continue operating. And the way that this traditionally has been done is very independent of the people that are writing and reporting and trying to remain ethical by remaining independent and seeking the truth, regardless of what that means for the business model. But that is very idealistic, and the way that current media companies operate, and I am speaking from my experience as a local news producer, I sat in the meetings where they said, this is who our audience is. This is the person that we believe watches the show the most, and we want to continue to have them watching because we need the viewers to sell the ads, and we need to sell the ads to pay you. And I was told to consider what that audience wants when I report the news, when I see a headline, when I see a breaking event. I was told to consider how to tell that to this audience that we've identified as the target. And that happens in every newsroom around the country, including the traditional sports media outlets, The Athletic, Sports Illustrated, The Washington Post, RIP, their sports department. But it's something that's talked about even at the local level. I'm sure that the sports writers for the Journal Sentinel in Milwaukee have thought about who their target reader is, or been told by their editors or their business leaders. And I'm sure it's the same for the Star Tribune writers in Minneapolis and the Republic writers here in Phoenix. There has been a way that they have identified how to make money, and they try and operate with that. And I think traditionally that has been a male figure or audiences when it comes to sports content. But the journalist and the reader are not the only ones in this life cycle of sports industry that I am trying to look at and explain. There are also the teams themselves, which are also a business. And I have been thinking about this most recently, that the sports team that you love, they're not the Cheesecake Factory. You're not getting a 4-page menu with 40 different options that are going to be made to order. And I use made to order very loosely in this hypothetical. But you are more like a wedding guest sitting at your table waiting for your turn at the buffet when it comes to your favorite sports team. Everyone's getting their chicken. Did you remember to ask for veggies? I didn't. I'm going to eat the same chicken as everyone else. It's not going to be great. Thank goodness I remembered to eat before I got there. But you know what I'm really excited about? I'm really excited to dance after I eat the chicken. And as long as there's a good DJ, as long as I get my dancing queen fix, like, I'm so happy I came to this wedding. Yeah, I'm eating the same chicken as everyone else. I'm just waiting at my table. You might be at the table of childhood friends. I'm probably at the table of weird coworkers that we don't understand how we got invited, but we're all just waiting for the buffet. And sorry if that's a little too weird. Maybe I've been watching too much Love Island and I'm taking after Sincere. But the gist of it is sports is a business, and they are going to try and cast the widest net possible for an audience. And I think it's going to be important in Femographics to talk about their own front office communications with journalists and how that dynamic plays into this life cycle that I am creating, because questions I have include, Are these sports teams having more control over the messaging that they're delivering these days? Where's the overlap of the audiences of who they're serving and who these reporters are serving? And also, do they owe possible conflicting segments of fans the same amount of care and attention, even if they're at odds with one another? Everyone's at the party. How much do you want us to get along at the party? I don't know. Do you want the in-laws fighting? Do you want the racist cousins? I don't know. It's up to you guys. As we're diving into this, I want to admit my own biases because this is something that I have thought about since I was a little girl. I fell victim to that sort of like male-centric canonization that had been happening that was really centered on who knew most when. And I was not a part of that group. And as a woman, I felt extra ostracized. And that hasn't stopped because in my graduate education, I had a professor talking about audiences and sports fans. And I have thought about this interaction once a week since it's happened. But essentially, there was chaos in the classroom. This was right after the Hoosiers won the championship. And the class had decided, or I shouldn't say that. What happened was some people wanted to talk about how Indiana did not have the greatest season in college football history. And they were the first thought leaders on this idea, really were talking about the 2019 LSU team. One guy got really passionate about the 2003 Miami, Ohio team. And it just was getting louder and louder. And the woman sitting next to me and I were kind of like, we're not enjoying this. Why are we wasting class time about this? Why is our professor entertaining this? And so she asked him, just kind of stood up there and over all of the voices declared, "We're sports fans. We love to argue," which didn't answer why we were essentially paying hundreds of dollars to waste class time to listen to 12, 23-year-olds cosplay as the next Stephen A. Smith. Because that's not the kind of sports fans I was. It wasn't the kind of sports fan she was in that moment. We were watching all the playoff games that Indiana were playing in. Did I watch their whole season? No, I don't love college football. But I know football and I can watch it and I can go, wow, this is incredible. Wow, that's amazing. Wow, Mendoza really played a lights out game in that championship game. And I'm going to remember him leaping into that end zone forever, probably. And that's incredible. And aren't sports amazing? And isn't it so cool to see an undefeated season like that? And maybe I'm a little too starry-eyed and bushy-tailed, and maybe that's just the literary nerd in me being like, but it's extra cool because you can't use the tropes, even though you want to make the, like, literary methods real. Like, it's impossible. You can never have the perfect story in sports, but you're trying to make sense of it, and sometimes it does happen. And isn't that cool? Anyway, I'm a little too idealistic, and I can't memorize stats for the life of me. But he was onto something, and this professor has been a working journalist, working editor, working mentor for decades, and his perception of these sports fans and the audience was that they wanted this argumentative style. They wanted to gather information so that they could have opinion, and then they could yell at each other about it. And that wasn't my experience, and that's not how I wanted to move forward, and that's not a publication that I want to write for. And it's been making me think a lot about where the media is at in terms of understanding the audiences that they're serving. And there are more segments happening, mostly because of social media and the algorithm being able to reach those people. And I wanted to share my personality, share my bias, so we can move forward together, because I have these ideas and I want to figure out where I'm right, where I'm wrong, and I want to help other journalists and other sports fans figure out what our place in all of this is. Because as journalists, if we're going to segment the audiences, if we're going to sit in those meetings and be told who the audience is and how to talk to them, what are our ethics of independence going to look like in the future? Are they eroding? What does that mean in a content space of an algorithm? What can we do? And why is the mainstream media so behind? I love writing. I love reporting. I love the act of seeking truth, and I love meeting people, and I enjoy telling their stories, whether it be inquisitive or a little bit more hard-hitting. But what's our future like if the people online are able to reach audiences better than we as journalists are? But could us focusing on different segments of audiences take away our independence? I don't know. Let's talk about it. Teams are having a little bit more success at identifying the different segments and reaching them. And I don't know if they are ever going to have a reckoning of the different segments of people occupying a space and having different beliefs about what a fan should or should not look like. But it's starting to happen. And how long can we all have fun at the party? I don't know. But as a fan, I think critically about these things, and I think about who I am, what I want to spend my time on, what do I want to consume. And if you love sports and you aren't thinking about the differences between the medias of which you're consuming, the various outputs of them, the overall reliability of them, it's important. And I'm really excited to talk about the various industries and how they're overlapping out of our understanding of sports and what that means as journalists and fans. So this is going to be Femographics, and I have some really great conversations that are coming up in the next episodes. So I hope you stick around, and I will talk to you soon.